And then we'll go into some silence. There's a interesting sort of archaic uh, terms is found in the canonical literature about as we deepen the practice and repeat it and going forward and backwards again. And the term that's used, it's an unusual term, is called successive leaving. Successive leaving. And so what this means, as far as the application of practice, that as we go through each part, we'll hone into each part going forward and backwards, and then we'll create a lot more space after that for you to go into the parts that are more compelling and leaving out the parts that are less compelling. So this is what the definition of successive leaving means. So going into those parts that seem to be calling to you, that compelling, and leaving out those parts that are less calling out to you, less compelling. But I think at first it's helpful to go through all of them, but then as we go into the silence, then maybe something lit up for you that, oh, I want to come back to kidneys, or I want to come back to flesh, or whatever it is, and just sensing into what's calling to you, what's compelling. And of course, if there's nothing very compelling, then you're welcome just to continue on in that methodical forward and backwards order, just sensing into the part, being aware of what's coming up physically, mentally, and emotionally. There could be aspects that seem very personal and some that seem very impersonal. Just these parts as they are. So beginning with flesh or muscle. Color is red, the shape is like bunches of meat bunched together, found both above and below the waist, located under the skin, and bordered by the skin above and the connective tissue, the sinews, below and around. And this muscle or flesh is actually 900 different groups of muscles under the skin, composed of cells or fibers that affect movement of an organ or part of the body. It has the properties of elasticity, conductivity, and irritability, as well as static support, like muscles of posture in the back. And so just sensing into this storage of tissue that fills the body, its ability, of course, to shorten or contract, to help facilitate movement, flesh or muscle. So I'm just going to go over each of these, pointing to them sequentially, just in the forward rotation rather than going backwards after that. But then for you to begin again, as I mentioned, to hone into the parts that are compelling, that, oh, I'd like to go there more, and leaving out those that are less compelling. So the next is sinews, or more anatomically correct to say connective tissue. Over 900 tendons and ligaments and cartilages. Color white, there are various strings and bands, cushions, found both above and below the waist, located under the skin, interwoven with the muscle, the skeleton. Tendons is fibrous connective tissue serving for the attachment of muscles to bones, capable of withstanding a lot of tension. Ligaments are sheets or bands of tough fibrous tissue that connects bones to bones or to cartilages at a joint, also supporting organs. In Latin, the word ligament means to tie or bind together. Cartilages are stiff and yet flexible connective tissue that forms cushions between bones, as well as in the joints between the rib cage, the ear, the nose, the elbow, the knee, the ankle, bronchial tubes, vertebrae, discs. These cushions. They're not as hard or as rigid as bone, but they're stiffer and less flexible than muscle. Cartilages help keep the body connected and prevent friction. All of these tendons and ligaments and cartilages help the body to connect itself to the bones and the organs. This connective tissue. And there's the bones, the human skeleton. The color is white, found of course above and below the waist, bordered by the marrow within and the sinews above, and some flesh. And the human skeleton is a bony framework consisting of 206 bones. A newborn baby has 350 bones, and they begin to mold and meld together. It's said that every 7 years the body replaces the equivalent of an entirely new skeleton. The largest bone is the pelvis, or the hip bone, and the smallest is the stirrup in the ear, hardly larger than a grain of rice. And the hardest bone, perhaps it's no coincidence, is the jawbone. The bones form part of the endoskeleton of the body. They're lightweight and strong and store minerals, and most notably calcium, phosphorus, but also important growth factors. Bones support the body and anchor the muscles to facilitate motion. They also can serve to protect internal organs, such as the skull, protecting the brain, and the ribs, protecting the heart, the ribs in the sternum, protecting the heart and the lungs, bones. And within the bones is bone marrow. It's yellow and red. It's a glutinous tissue. Marrow is found mainly in the flat bones, such as the hip, the breastbone, the skull, the ribs, the vertebrae, the shoulder blades, as well as in the long bones at the end of the femur and humerus. This is the soft tissue occupying the soft cavities of the bones. As mentioned, is red and yellow marrow. The red blood cells produce platelets, and most of the white blood cells arise in red marrow. At birth, our marrow is red, and with age it's converted to yellow. But in the case of severe blood loss, the body can convert yellow marrow back to red to increase blood cell production. Bone marrow contains those cells that are responsible for the production of red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Bone marrow. And then last in this group is kidneys. Color is purplish and brown, shaped like two large kidney beans found in the mid-back behind the abdomen, one on each side of the spine. Kidneys form urine from blood plasma. They're blood purifiers. They are the major regulators of the water, electrolytes, blood pressure, and the acid-base contents of the blood, and indirectly to many other bodily fluids. They eliminate toxic wastes, such as urea. In one day, the blood flows through the kidneys. 400 gallons of blood flow through the kidneys in one day. 16.5 gallons an hour. So we've been here a half hour, a little bit over a half hour. About 8 gallons have flown through our kidneys if they're working properly. So flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, and kidneys. Kidneys, bone marrow, bones, sinews, flesh. So we go into some silence, sensing into these parts, honoring what comes up physically as you sense into them, what may arise with our thoughts and emotions. And again, there may be personal aspects that come out, arise within, or perhaps the more impersonal, just these kidneys just pumping the blood, filtering the blood. Sensing into this fathom-long body. And these beautiful poetic words from the Buddha that within this fathom-long body, with the thoughts and emotions, lies our world. Right there. Within this fathom-long body, with its thoughts and emotions, lies our world. Its origin, its beginning, its cessation, its end, and the pathway to freedom is found within this fathom-long body. So sensing into the body, acknowledging what's present, and with this kind and curious attention, being present. And so again, just sensing into the parts that are more compelling, that draw your interest, and for those that are not compelling, just leaving them for now. If you're not sure where to go, then you're welcome just to methodically just touch upon each one. Flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, bone marrow, bones, sinews, flesh. Within this fathom-long body being present. flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys. Kidneys, bone marrow, bones, sinews, flesh. So flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, bone marrow, bones, sinews, flesh. This inside of the body of muscles, connective tissue, the skeleton, the blood formation of the marrow, the blood purification of the kidneys. These parts, of course, are connected to so many other parts in all of the different systems of the body. So each one of these, in the spirit of interconnection that they are with each other, are gateways into all of the other parts of the body. But for now, just beginning to focus with these, but they may eventually lead to many other parts. And within this fathom-long body, with our thoughts and emotions, as the Buddha says, lies our world. And within this world, investigating deeply our sense of identity, which is also a deep part of this practice. There's these functions, and yet we have a lot of opinions about these functions and these parts. So perhaps at times going into these body parts will evoke our stories, our narratives, our shame, our fears, our concerns, our pain. And whatever arises to be met, to be acknowledged, to be perhaps at times investigated. Oh, I'm still carrying this shame, this identification. And upon this understanding, perhaps becoming a little less activated, a little less identified. And of course, also just understanding from a very impersonal sense, these parts have their definitions and functions. So may we open to compassion for this body. This is the only body we will get in this life, the vehicle that we live inside of, to grow, to awaken, to develop wisdom, develop compassion. So this sobering connection that we can develop with the body, with kindness, with compassion, understanding its definition, its functions. Perhaps at times understanding the stories that we've attributed to it that has caused so much pain. And perhaps in time lessening the pain. Seeing through those stories that have held us hostage. Martha Elliott writes that our history is here inside our body, and our body is our storehouse of all of our learnings and thoughts and experiences. Our history is here inside this body. Such a wonderful practice is 32 parts of the body, entering into the skin, to the tissue, to the bones, to the marrow, to the organs, to the liquids, within this fathom-long body. So may we open to compassion and great kindness for ourselves and this body that is inhabited with this mind. And may all embodied beings find the gateways into their hearts to grow with deeper wisdom and compassion. Practicing in this way, we understand the reverence of all life, how fragile, how precious this life. Perhaps in time, the understanding of wanting to cause the least harm possible. Beginning to see through our identifications and stories that separate us from one another. May all beings be with peace. May they see and grow in deep insight and wisdom and compassion. May all beings dwell with peace. So thank you so much for this diving into the body. In the spirit of community, I think it's nice for us to connect with each other, and I think Kara, being the host, has the ability to put us into small groups.